Thank you all very much for coming out this afternoon, especially braving the dampness. And it's a great pleasure for me to introduce to you all, or reintroduce to you, Molly Dineen, who, as many of you will know, ever since her first film, a student film, in the early 1980s, in 1985, has been widely recognised as one of the most sort of distinguished and also distinctive British documentarians. You'll know many of those films: Home from the Hill, The Ark, Voice of the Angel, the Lie of the Land. And we're going to see clips from some of those and talk about and around those. She's also the winner of 2 BAFTAs for The Ark, a BAFTA for the Best Series, and also for The Lie of the Land. In 2007. And in 2003, she was awarded the Grierson Trustees Award for outstanding contributions to the art of documentary. We've structured the conversation to last approximately for about 45 minutes, and in order to allow kind of ample time for sort of comments, reflections, questions from you all, which we very much look forward to hearing from you. We're going to start with perhaps a kind of loose canon in your filmography, Jerry, about one of the great pop singers of the last 15 years, Jerry Halliwell, which a film at the time was, even at the time, there was some degree of kind of disgruntlement. You weren't creating a Molly Dineen film in some people's eyes. You'd sort of let people down. And it was also a film about somebody much younger than some of your subjects, much more obviously well known to hundreds of millions of people all over the world. I'm going to show you some clips from that, but maybe you'd like to just kind of introduce it a little.
Yeah, I thought it was a bizarre choice to start with because I've always made the same film, which is about elderly white men in collapsing institutions who lean very strongly to the right. And that Jerry was this very, it was an odd, I made it basically because she phoned me and asked me to make it. Because I had made a lot of films and then I had children, which completely screwed up the way I worked because it meant I couldn't go and live in. And I hadn't really thought about it and how I was going to do it. But when the first thing I did after having children was make a party political broadcast for Tony Blair, for which I'm deeply, deeply apologetic, and it was a silly thing to do. And it got me into quite a lot of trouble because it also got me branded as a particular type of person. And plus which I think you shouldn't do it if you make documentaries. You don't try and sell politicians. But nevertheless, I was really interested in shooting the way I shoot and trying to get things out of people who are in the public eye. There was obviously a huge contradiction because people in the public eye want to present what they think people should see of them, and what you're after is something probably different. So it was choppy waters with Jerry. And maybe we should show the clip. But basically, I started filming her in a very non-committal way on a home video in between sessions in the playground, basically. And then it kind of got its own momentum. I was appalled by her ego because she basically wanted me to be a courtier. I was going to follow her around and film her, and then if she thought there was enough good material, she might make it into a film. But I was equally arrogant. I also thought I was obviously shit hot, and why was I really wasting my time with her? And so we had these battles. I think it's probably the first and only time I've put the process, the debate of film and the access in a film, because I had to explain the context. I think the clip is when she and I are arguing on the train.
Yeah.
Is that right? Yeah.
Scary baby posh and sporty really want right now is to find Ginger, who's gone missing from the spice rack.
Today is Thursday the 28th of May. I'm in Paris and yesterday I left Spice Girls permanently. I thought it would be really good to basically record life after, right from the beginning, to see what basically happened. So I'm in Paris with my brother. basically trying to hide from the media.
Big writing to you, that's so strong.
There you go.
She looks fantastic.
I was becoming intrigued by the situation. I should have realised there'd be complications, though. Jerry got on the phone to her lawyer to tell him that I was taking over her film.
Best smile. No, just be natural. I've got complete control on it. It'll be edited. If there's anything, bad in it, or then when it's really serious, we'll leave the room. Okay. Okay.
Sorry, but I'm just listening to you then, and what you just said to him about this film being totally in your control, and I'm sitting here thinking, no, it's not.
It is though. It is in my control. If I don't like it.
But I'm not going to spend months following you round for then you on a whim to say, no, I don't like it. You see what I mean? That's what I meant. You either hand over a bit to me, or I can't do it.
Yeah. I'm not that egotistical. I think, this is just about me. But then on the other hand, as my managing myself, this has, to a degree, of course I don't. What's the point of making a film to destroy my public image? Do you know what I mean? That's stupid. But then I'm sort of being trusting enough on my instincts to say, well, hold on, Jerry, you'll just be yourself, and if I'm just myself anyway, I'm not a horrible person. So hopefully, people, I'm daring to bear. I'm daring to do it. I'm daring to go there, trying to go there as best as I can.
Yeah, but what a lot of people will question is why. Is it that you're an egomaniac? Or that you can't live without a camera?
Why does there have to be a bad motive?
Because it's very unusual, I suppose.
What are the good motives behind it then? I think from a creative point of view, I can see this as interesting, even if it was just a narcissistic pop star sitting here. Dear Charles.
Who was this to and why?
This is to Prince Charles. So, dear Charles, hello. Hope you're fine. Hope you're okay. Hope you're fine, I hope you're okay. What do you think, Molly?
I think you've got to write it as you would write it.
No, I need your help, please.
Why do you need my help? You should
Because
write
I don't think I'm good enough to write
Yes,
it.
you are.
I don't think it's the best circumstance for you to be sitting, writing, trying to concentrate when you're hot and getting hot and bothered.
Please, I need you. You're the right calibre to deal with such matters, so he doesn't look at this and think, what common.
No, I don't think I should get involved.
No, but I want you to. Just film that. Or with one hand, but give me your brain. You don't need your brain the minute while you're filming, do you?
God, that's really probably the end of your career.
I read in a Sunday Times paper in this interview, and it said, it quoted Melanie B, quote, we're stronger than ever since Jerry's left. We don't need her anymore. And to be honest, that says it absolutely all. That says absolutely everything. We don't need her anymore. None of it seems real. I don't know what's happened and just... What do you think?
I think it's quite important to confront certain emotions. It's a bit like why there's no need for a funeral when somebody's died. It's a kind of formal way of saying this is gone. And in a way, sometimes I think you spend too much time in denial, saying it doesn't matter,
Yeah, I suppose of course it matters, But then sometimes I question what I'm crying about.
What are the options? What could it be?
Sometimes I think people use sad events in their life and they're crying about something completely different.
think I'm insufferably bossy. I just want to say that I would never, ever, ever normally talk that much. But it was pared down. It was she and I. There was no sound recordist. There was no protection. And I think, when I watch that, I just think I say too much. What right have I got to burble on about, why she's crying?
Well,
but it was a very unusual situation for me to be in, and that's why it evolved in this way, this film.
I mean, talking about evolution, as you pointed out, she's somebody, as many people of her status are, surrounded by yes men and courtiers and people who are there to do her beck and call. And she's somebody who's clearly conflated access with control of the film that you're going to produce. But over time, that does break down. And how did you manage to kind of renegotiate the relationship?
Well, we started off having really bad arguments because, as I said, we were basically both being quite arrogant. But I felt very protective towards her because what I realised is that she was actually very alone. I mean, she had Matthew Freud on the end of a phone, which wasn't very nice for me. But I think, he, as in the PR person. And what she was basically doing is that she'd left the Spice Girls, gone into hiding, but couldn't bear not to still be filmed and still needed the attention. So there's an obvious film to make about that kind of problem with celebrities. But equally, I think when somebody lays themselves open to you, and I realised quite soon that I could sort of have the upper hand with her. And it became quite big sisterish, and I got quite nanny-ish and bossy. And I think, I've always felt that you have to protect people you film. You want an openness and you want a depth, but you want an emotional depth, which means you're going to have to not go for maybe some of the more obviously interesting aspects of her. And I was never particularly confrontational. I was a bit on the train, but then actually, I think I'm bad. She asks a question and I don't answer it. She says, why is it bad to want to be filmed? But in the edit, obviously, I protect myself from the reply. We just cut away somewhere.
Do you remember what your reply was?
No, because I didn't have one. I mean, actually, I just thought it was unattractive to want to keep yourself in the public eye when, in fact, famously, she'd left and gone into hiding. And I didn't want to be part of her PR campaign. But I also thought, mistakenly, I'd had a baby, she's a woman, she'll understand somehow, it'll all fit in, because I'd been living with the army prior to that, which wouldn't have worked with a baby. So I think I just thought we could drift into it together, in the sandpit, and it was totally wrong. It was really, really tough. Because she had a reason to have it made, and actually because Channel 4 then very much wanted it to be made, whereas I was bumbling around a bit.
I mean, a number of your films do explore or delve into questions about what is this nation now, aspects of national identity. And, I mean, I suppose it's hard to remember, but in the kind of mid-90s, the Spice Girls were being held up as kind of icons of a new kind of gender performance, of a new kind of revival of swinging Britain, Vanity Fair covers, and all of this kind of... Was there a sense of her being attractive to you because she was meant to,
No.
in some people's lives, a kind of
No,
break?
not at all. I think that was a complete access moment. I just thought, God, bloody hell, the whole world wants to know where she is, and she's called me up and said, would you make a film about me? It was pure sluttish access. That's what it was about. And actually, I didn't know what the film was about. To begin, I did at the beginning, but I thought I can't make that because it would be totally hypocritical to make friends with her whilst constantly shafting her if I'd made the obvious film. So, and because the way I'd met her is because of wanting to make a film. Having been with Alistair Campbell and Peter Mandelson for 3 months, I thought that obviously the film to make is about artificial Britain and about selling things that aren't true and about front. And so that was another reason I was interested in looking at fame, but this came about accidentally. So it wasn't the film, it was the Rolling Stones was what I was really after, but I was sent by Virgin Records to meet the Spice Girls. And I cried during their concert. It was so sad because it was so ill thought out. They were projecting such sexuality, and the little girls in the audience who were all strutting their stuff with their daddies clapping along, and I just thought it was so shocking. You could have made an incredible film about the Spice Girls, but not if you're me, because you need to be complicit. You need to basically believe a bit in what you're filming. But that's how I met Jerry.
And in spite of what you say, you're now friends with her. Is that
Yeah.
right? And you
I like
managed
her
to-
hugely. She's a very, very nice woman. And she's attractive because she's desperate to learn. She's so open. I mean, her one big problem is this addiction to fame and how she keeps herself alive and on the level. And we have quite a curious relationship now.
I think, am I right in saying you've spoken about the film for you as being therapeutic or a form of therapy?
No.
Okay. Well,
I'm just trying to think why. What? For me, it was a form of therapy.
Yeah.
No. In fact, what was really difficult was not having a sound recordist. I don't like films to be that intimate. I want an intimacy, but it's a bit like maybe when you're dating, when somebody's too keen, it's a turn-off. I think there has to be a very healthy tension between you. I like filming people who aren't desperate to be filmed, where there's it's not a sexual tension, but it is a tension that's attractive. And when it bleeds through, you genuinely have somebody revealing themselves, which is, I suppose, why I often film people who are very unlike me. In other words, elderly men in charge of things, or not in charge of things, but no, I don't know where that came from. So I don't mean to be annoying saying that, but it didn't feel therapeutic. It felt very problematic because I needed someone else to be there, but I'd never committed to a schedule. So because it was operating in this very casual way, whereby she'd phone up and say, I'm going to do X, or I'd phone her and say, what are you doing? I mean, you can't have a sound recordist when you're operating like that.
This might be a good time to go to some of those older men that you've spoken about, and we're going to show, I think it's just the one clip from Home from the Hill, which is, for those of you who haven't seen it, about Colonel Hilary Hook. He's been living in Kenya for many decades, and he's about to leave to an England that he thinks he knows, but of course it's transformed massively, and it exists in two guises, and if those of you who've seen the recently released BFI DVD, we'll have a chance to compare the two different versions. But it started out as a national film and television school film.
Yeah, it was. I got into the National Film School, I think, because Colin thought I was going to be a producer. Was that right? You thought I'd be good at organising people. But I'd been working with a camera crew. I'd been following focus round door frames. I'd done had that sort of training. I was totally blown away by what the film school taught, and with a conviction and a passion that basically meant, I mean, I wrote a shooting script for my first exercise, and Herb de Joya, who was the tutor there, held it up for the class to laugh at because he thought it was such a joke, and it was a joke. In fact, it's probably what the BBC want now, which is wide shot, somebody walks in the room, close up, the door shuts. I mean, breaking down reality. And Herb taught through the Maisels, Penny Baker, Leacock, all the great observational filmmakers, Nick Broomfield, Joan Churchill. We watched all the films, we discussed them, we worshipped the method. And then I had to find a subject for a first-year film. And in fact, my boyfriend's father was Hilary Hook, and he lived in Kenya, and I was out there at Christmas with a mute camera, which is called an acclaimed, and a tape machine. And he got evicted from his house in Kenya while I was there. And because, I mean, it was obviously an extraordinary moment for him. And I said, could I make a film about you for film school? And he said, of course, sweetie. Because I think we just both pissed about. I thought it was a student exercise, and he certainly did. And plus which, it was filming a virgin. He hadn't watched television for 40 years. So all the kind of hideous self-consciousness we all have to deal with now when everybody's on telly, and it's quite hard to work out where reality stops and starts. Hilary got on with his life, and Sarah and I were in tow. The Kenyan stuff is quite strange. It's mute. And we had to snip it into sync. I showed it to the film school. Colin looked at it, Herb looked at it, and they said, okay, you can follow it through as your first year film. And then I started trying to shoot in this way, where you handhold and you ask questions. I was never observing. I think what evolved was a much more participational style, because I wasn't standing back and looking at life like Wiseman or somebody does. I was involved, and I was involved because actually she and I became his house servants, because he'd come back from a lifetime in the colonies or boarding school. Women had always looked after him. And that was the natural order of things. So we were cooking and shopping and washing, and then suddenly we'd try and film. And I think the clip we're going to see is when I thought this is ridiculous because we're totally affecting the reality, and we have to get him to try and buy his own food or live as he might do or cook his own meal. And we filmed the results. I hope that is the clip, but if it's anything else, I'll tell you which one it is. Can we have more volume on the clips? Thank
Unusual fruits as well.
Such a variety of cheese, of course, you know, we spoiled for choice.
Particularly in the fresh food line, I like the meat because they cater for different sorts of people.
It's such good value.
Better value for money. No two ways about it.
Here we are, ravioli. Now we put in this bloody machine. It opens it in a flare. We'll see. It doesn't work, and it you do it, darling. I can't manage this thing.
No, you've got to learn to open a can. Sarah, go and go home.
Bloody the hell. Oh, I hate these fucking modern things.
Turn it on. Switch.
Mike's up.
I don't understand how these things work. What's this bloody bit of machinery? It's a pair of tweezers, is it, Pepe? I'm not going to bloody well do it. Fuck the thing. I'll go to a pub.
You've got to cook at some point, you know that.
No. I'm not going to manage that game.
How do you think you're going to eat?
I'm going to do very well without eating. I can't manage that at all.
Do you know, at that point, in the BBC film, they do a dissolve back to Kenya. We had such terrible fights. I so wanted the film to be on the BBC. And they came to the school, and you showed them a load of documentaries, and basically they came to the school to say none of you will get jobs because it's a very overcrowded industry. And Colin sent him, Will Wyatt, a handful of films, and they bought it the next day, which was obviously fabulous. It's a 58-minute film, and it's totally chronological, as in the way I had been taught. And we spent a year in the cutting room. A year. That's how long we spent with good edits, bad edits, and me trying to work out how you cut this sort of stuff together. It was the most wonderful experience to have. But the recut was brutal, and there were terrible, terrible, terrible scenes about it because they did the unforgivable, which is they changed the chronology. They put one of the end scenes at the front. I mean, I do love the 40 minutes version of the film, and it did me proud, so I'm not being silly about it. But I always think it's very painful because actually in the long film, it builds emotionally. So you realise then he is making a decision. It is how he died. He just stopped eating, really. But if you go back to Kenya, as if he's thinking, I wish I had Africans to make me scrambled egg, it's not at all what he's thinking. It's fundamentally, you know, he realises his world has gone and it's not really worth, on a very deep level, carrying on with it.
Yes, and the way he's contextualised at the start, or kind of sort of located as part of a sort of flotilla.
Yes, the 40 minutes version opens with a whole load of men in bowler hats marching through the park. But they said at the time, and I wasn't to know, that they know better than me, which is we've got to say at the beginning, we have to grab an audience and say who he is, what type he is, and then we can go with it. Whereas if we begin, my film from the film school began with him lying in bed smoking. And that's a very slow start. And if you've got a cinema audience who are already committed, then you can do that. But I do appreciate on telly, with the general flow of things, that you've got to grab them at the beginning. And that was why they did that.
Yes. And did you have many other kind of run-ins with the people at the BBC? Because there is a sense in which, at one level, he could be caricatured as a buffoon, as a kind of antiquated relic of an old imperial order.
No, we did actually. One of the things that, to be careful not to sound too beastly about it, but they put a fiction editor onto it who was really resentful. Imagine he'd been given a film school film to recut for telly, and what he was used to cutting was drama. And he went about it with a venom. And it was fascinating, he cut Hilary's interviews and took the sync sound out and made it voice-over shots of Africans. So, for example, because Sarah and I were filming Hilary in this kind of way, and although I wanted to film him this way as he actually was, basically so you could get as close as you possibly could to his experience of coming back and being alone. I've completely lost my thread.
You're talking about...
No, wait. Yes, because so I then did an interview with Sarah where we swapped roles. And we did a formal interview, and we sat Hilary down. Sarah was behind the camera, and I interviewed him with a mic so that we had eye-to-eye contact, and I asked him proper grown-up questions about his past. And the problem with that is that he was very interested in it. He felt reassured by it. It was the proper way to treat a colonel, basically. But the BBC this editor took the sound of it, cut out the pauses, and put it as voice-over shots of Africans. So whereas he says to me in sync, we were brought up to make soldiers out of savages, and he's hesitating because what he's doing is he's parodying himself. He knows, and you know from the way he's saying it, he doesn't really mean soldiers and savages. If you make that a didactic statement over shots of Africans serving him in Kenya, you've created a very different sort of character. That was the fight at its worst.
Yes.
But to be fair to them, it's not how the film ended up. I think he ended up a very sympathetic character in the BBC one, and they showed it 4 or 5 times, and he ended up on Wogan with Brian May and Anita Dobson. That was terrible. But he became sort of a minor celebrity.
He got marriage offers, is that right?
He got marriage offers, yes. There were women who went down and said, I'll cook for you, and there were women who... He says at one point when he's washing up, it's a great fat woman is what I want, really. And these women wrote in swearing that they were enormous and that they'd cook for him, do everything.
Can you imagine that film appearing on TV today? Because I remember watching that film when I was at school, and it was obviously a very different televisual landscape. Many people, or some people I think in the country, still didn't have access to Channel 4. So we had 3 or 4 channels as well, and there's a way in which anything on TV, and especially documentary, felt part of a public conversation, felt as if it made a difference.
Yeah.
As well. Now, obviously, things are much more sort of pluralised, audiences are fragmented, and the ability of a film to make a difference, however we constitute a difference, has obviously sort of changed, and of course, the styles of filmmaking have altered a lot. Is this a film that can only be understood in its moment?
No, I think it stuck out more than it would now because there were 3 or 4 channels, and therefore inevitably you had a much greater stage. There was much more dialogue because there was fewer things to talk about. Plus, which 40 minutes as a strand was a known strand. So I think that it's funny that because I would say documentaries have just as much effect now, maybe more on the cinema. people are freer now to make more freestyle documentaries. This is quite a battle because everything was much more formal. Documentaries, particularly BBC documentaries, did tend to be 3 characters interviewed on a sofa with lots of cutaways to illustrate. I mean, obviously, because they weren't showing the verite films and the observational films and the films that we'd all been made very familiar with at the film school.
You've never gone down the road of making films primarily for cinema?
No. I don't know why. I'd love to. I think, I don't know, I think I'm very telly, though. I was always very excited by television. I love the idea that people stumble across your film by accident rather than choose to go and see something and they know what they're going to get. I think that's thrilling, because then you get people who are surprised. And because I suppose one thing that does excite me is challenging people's stereotypes, which is why I often film. I mean, I parody myself, but when I say upper-class white men, there has been a lot of that. And I think sometimes it's because I'm interested in trying to get to humanity despite power or packaging, so that you may think, and all my mates hated Hilary and what he stood for, but I was trying to make him, to show them, if you like. If you have someone in mind when you make a film, or an audience in mind, it's to challenge preconceptions. And therefore, it's also journalistically dishonest, because I'm not telling the whole truth ever.
There's another film you made, which I think is probably one of your lesser-known films, about a woman, Sylvia, who just lived 10 minutes away from him. But that was in 1988. I mean, I think, is it the third and final part of, or the third and final film you made for the 40-minute strand, is The Heart of the Angel, which is the film we're going to see a clip from now. That also was very different from the first 2.
Well, because I had this really wonderful stroke of luck with the BBC buying a film school film, but then they wanted another film with Hilary, which I couldn't do. I just felt it was ridiculous. In fact, in hindsight, I should have done it, because he went on the P&O Canberra as an ornithological lecturer. Would have been wonderful. But instead, I made a film about his neighbour, which is this very, very tricky woman in Kenya. So The Heart of the Angel was the first film I'd made where I was on home territory, shooting with Sarah and with a very public institution. And it was just after, I mean, I wanted to do it because I'd made some films on Operation Rally, and I'd met a bloke from Signals in London Underground on that film, which was an expedition up a mountain. And I'd gone to visit him at work in the tunnels at night as a friend. And in the middle of the night, this gang of Jamaicans came out of a tunnel carrying a rail which someone had put on the Northern Line the wrong way round. And they were having to walk the whole length of the Northern Line to turn it round. And they all had huge gold medallions and naked flames and tilly lamps. And I thought, this is extraordinary. I mean, I had absolutely no idea about the underground. So that's what got the idea going. But then making it was an odd situation, because the King's Cross fire had just happened. I don't know if you remember that, but it was a really mega tragedy, and lots of people got killed. And the underground, I mean, the PR man at the underground was a total alcoholic. He used to just sit in his room with a minibar, basically. And but they wanted a film that would make people feel more comfortable about the underground. But so they let me in, and I was 6 months going around on night tunnel cleaning trains before I knew what film to make. I was so excited by it. It was the most extraordinary world. But but I think, yes, The Angel came about because I went to choir practice at that station, and there was a nutty lift operator. I had to make a decision as to which film to make and where, and I didn't quite know where I was going, but I stuck religiously in that station with the staff who worked there, and I think it's my favourite of my films.
If there is a God, there is heaven. I'm going to ask him a lot of bloody questions when I get up there, so I want to know what all this is all about. You don't ask to be born, do you? Do you?
No.
Right, nobody asks to be born. They're here from the pure selfishness of their parents. The mother or the father did not decide they want children. So you're propelled into this earth. You don't ask to be born, and once you've been born, you're just waiting to die, basically, aren't you? You're born, you live, you die. You're here, you're not, you are, and you're not. And that's the end of it. And I want to know why.
But there's supposed to be a certain amount of pleasure in the meantime.
There is. In fact, that's the only answer I could ever give my son when he said to me one day, "Why was I born, Dad? Why am I here?" I said, "Well, if you hadn't been born, son, you wouldn't have known the pleasure of what it is to be alive."
But that makes it sound as if you're very depressed.
I'm not depressed at all. Realistic, I think, more the term. It's like people often say to me, "Why aren't you ever miserable?" I said, "Well," I think I've come to terms with, if you can come to terms with the sort of life you've got, like lack of education, lack of opportunity because of the war, things like that, and you can still fit into a niche and be prepared to accept that you're not going to go any further. I think that's the difference between being happy and miserable. Because I'm not going to achieve anything in life. So, as you say, I must be depressed, mustn't I?
What would you actually like to have achieved?
I don't really know. Dreams you can have, but that's not the same as wanting to achieve something, is it? First thing, I'd like to have been taller, because being short is a bit of an obstacle. I'd like to have had a better education, and so I was more aware of things, you know, like the better things in life, like good literature, good paintings, and that sort of thing. But having said that, I'll get by all right, I suppose. Mrs. thinks I'm wonderful, and my mother thought I was lovely. I can't be too bad. You think I'm gorgeous, don't you?
I think you're right.
I think you're wonderful. Can I drink my water now, please?
Yes.
Thank you.
His eyes are so beautiful.
He's fabulous, isn't he?
There's a moment in this film with, I think it's one of the Jamaican workers, and she sort of breaks out into song. And it kind of reminds me of a piece that many of you will be familiar with, Jesus' Blood Never Failed Me Yet, by Gavin Bryars, a sort of film about a homeless guy in South London, just kind of looped endlessly to become this kind of sort of symphony of sorrow lasting about sort of 25 minutes. There's also an extraordinary moment in the Hilary Hook film, in the previous film, An African Farm, where two women are sort of listening to the Christmas Day service or the Queen's message on the World Service, and it's crackling, it's wobbling as well. The sound is a lifeline of a nation that is the centre of their identity, and it's obviously kind of drowning as well. It seems that so many different levels, sound is a really huge part of the work you do in relation to how you use or don't use soundtracks.
It's good to say silence.
Yeah.
What I'm quite keen on.
Yeah, and you record a lot. I think that's one of the you have hundreds of hours for many of your films of just voices.
Now, I was thinking that what's so perfect about that is almost a studio situation with Derek, because he's doing his job, so customers would come and go, which also create a fantastic interruption. So you're talking and people will come up and the context changes. I mean, for a filmmaker, if you can get permission to be in that place where you've got the character, it's quiet, you'll have natural interruptions, he's comfortable or she's comfortable with you. It is one of those situations that's totally conducive to the way I work, because I say that because there are so many situations that aren't, that you find yourself in or put yourself in, where frankly you're just operating so against the odds to get anything good, which is why I think that's for me, I think that's such a perfect moment. I know it's not for him, because what he's saying is nothing's going to happen, but I mean, it's brilliant that he should feel able to say that, and he's relaxed enough to say it. And I think the last thing I'd want to do is mess about with the soundtrack. I really passionately hate the amount of music that goes into films. I watched a wonderful film here, the Terry Pratchett film, which to me was almost destroyed by the soundtrack, which was so busy. There was so much music telling me what to feel. I didn't need to be told what to feel. It was intensely emotional. And I think that there's either insecurity, I mean, who knows at what level the insecurity happens, whether it's broadcasters wanting bums on seats, or whether it's us trying to please broadcasters, or whether it's a film that's not working in the cutting room, so you cover it with music or cut it from every possible point of view to keep it spicy. But the bottom line is, if you've got somebody who has something to say in a situation that is relevant to us and in a context that's worth noting, then you've got it. You don't need to pile it all on. So I feel really, really strongly about music. Obviously, I've used it increasingly as I've not been in slots, but if you do standalone telly and you've got to begin and come out of the schedules, and the adverts are now so bloody good, aren't they? And they're fast cut and they're wazzy and they're noisy. It's really tricky now to follow an advert on commercial telly with a documentary. You've got to do something quite particular at the front. And I'm aware of that looking at my older films that frankly just begin. And they either just begin because I have a film school confidence that's saying it is all right to just begin and you don't have to sell, or they're just beginning because I'm within the 40-minute strand. So they've done all the busyness of saying this is a documentary, so I can start. I have got increasingly busy at the beginning of my films.
We're going to show a couple of clips now from, I think, one of the most difficult films that you made in the company of men.
No, it wasn't actually the most difficult. It was difficult. Do you know, I wanted to say something about sound recording just then. Would you mind?
Yeah, no, of course.
Which is just that it's the business of there being two of you. I know it's also because it's technically possible to shoot on your own, and again, increasingly I've done that, but frankly it's laziness. It's because I haven't committed to a schedule and I can fall out of the door on my own without telling anyone and start filming and stick a radio mic on somebody. But what I love about the earlier films is I've got a sound recordist who's also, as Nick was saying earlier, when there are two of you, you can deal so much better socially with the situation. So Sarah Jeans, who recorded sound for a lot of these early films and for the Army series, was absolutely fantastic, not just technically and physically because she'd sort a lot of things out. It wasn't me arranging parking a car plus loading the magazine plus everything else. She was sorting things, but she also had this incredible atmosphere about her. And it meant that when I was basically pissed off with being nice, you can't be nice all the time, but why should anyone have you around unless you're pleasant company? You can't be stroppy with people you're filming. Not if you want the sort of contact I want. And Sarah, we were sort of hot-bunked it. So when you were about to lose it, particularly with tricky characters, like the ladies in Africa, Sarah was always there, just picking up that thread, and she'd keep it going and say, do you want a cup of tea? I mean, not manipulatively, it just stands to reason. It's just how any of us would behave without a camera. It's social behaviour, which is also, I think, a sound point, because in my early films you can hear what people say, and increasingly you can't, because I'm on my own, fucking about with radio mics, and I've got so much going on in my ear, I've actually forgotten what I asked anybody anyway, because you become a sort of complete Christmas tree of cables, but actually what you're trying to do is have quite a serious conversation and make somebody feel that you like them and you want to listen to them and you care about them, which is very hard to do with all that going on.
We're running.
Sorry, I interrupted.
No. We're running out of time a bit, so I think we should probably just show a couple of clips from Lie of the Land, and then we'll move on.
Did I interrupt you from the Army?
No, sorry. In the Company of Men,
yes.
And then we'll close with the Lie of the Land.
Okay. What are we showing? Should we tell them why?
Do you want to set it up?
What we're looking at. Oh, wonderful casting. Fantastic yes. Army Major.
If you were to look down the hill, you can see exactly why nearly 100 men are devoted to the defence of this one police station while it's rebuilt. Imagine if you drove a tractor up here with the RA have a Mark 15, big mortar in a gas jar. You could lob it in there just like a whiz bang. It's 100 kilograms of explosive, and if we're in there when it hits, it's goodnight Vienna. That is why these guys you're seeing here now, they're tired, they're wet, they're probably quite pissed off. They're out here day in, day out, 24 hours a day.
What will happen once it's been rebuilt?
Probably attack it, yeah. But at least once it's rebuilt, the protection inside it will be enough so that providing you're not standing in the open when it comes over the fence, you'd probably be all right, unless you're really unlucky. At the moment, if they drop one in there now, even on the fortified police building, we'd be fucked, basically. Bruce is going to be thrown in at the deep end, I think would be a reasonable thing to say.
God, could you stop for a second?
Live with his gang.
Let me just explain, sorry, because the point... God, I was doing a film with the Welsh Guards. I was in Northern Ireland when Northern Ireland was operational, so there were huge security issues. I'd cast this, I'd researched, as you do, I'd found Crispin Black, because I knew immediately he was fabulous for my sort of film. Because you do, if it's just you and them, you need somebody who can handle it, who can speak, who frankly can perform a bit, like Derek in the ticket office. I mean, it's natural performance ability. Hilary Hook, the same. And also with something to say. And Crispin, as you can see, has got this huge capacity to do that. But he was in a police station run by the RUC. And they were protecting it from the Mark 15 mortar. Anyway, RUC Enniskillen got pissed off with us being there and threw us out. And I lost my character, but I had a budget and I wanted, it was for the BBC, I really didn't want to let the series collapse. So the army chose an officer for me to go into a patrol checkpoint. So it was army territory, and he was a young officer who'd had his first ever, what do you call it? Anyway, it was his first job with his platoon. And so I made a film about somebody I hadn't chosen to film. And that's the point of this second clip, which is just in comparison. Thank you.
And patrol out of Killyvilly, quite close to the Irish border, and in circumstances of some risk and danger.
You can lead through your rank, in other words, just enforce things through the authority of the system, or you can lead through through your your personality.
That's very cruel. And actually, it's the only film I've ever made that the person in it was really unhappy. He's very unhappy with me now. I showed it to him. I always show my films when they're rough enough that you can do something about it. But actually, and he watched it, and he wasn't happy about it, but he wasn't happy about his whole life in the army, and it was okay. And then he phoned me up a few days later and just wanted me to change. And there's a scene which is very naughty. We had him radio mic'd, and he's really bollocking this guardsman. He's saying, "You fucking well do this, and you fucking well do that." And he phoned up and said, "I really, really want you to change that, because my grandmother has never heard me swear, and I don't want it on television." I said, "Bruce, it's too late. It's dubbed. I've done it now." And I mean, funny enough, the MOD preferred that film out of all of them because they felt it showed how difficult it is being a young officer in the army. But I think it's cruel, and it's a cruel opening, because I've stuck the knife in from the beginning, haven't I, with that.
I mean, you talk about casting, and you talk about performance, and the difference between kind of performing just for the camera and a certain kind of natural charisma or character. How do you get a kind of best sense of that? I suppose when you look especially at kind of younger people these days, you're used to the presence of cameras, be it on your computer, on CCTV, taking photographs of yourselves and your friends, and there's a sense of that you're performing identity from a very young age, and you're aware of operating in a kind of mediascape, and it's hard sometimes to kind of locate a sort of semi-authentic core. It seems like just the nature of a certain kind of English character or identity is changing, and as it is in many countries. So how do you kind of gauge for yourself when you're getting to that truth of character?
I think because, I mean, in the way that you do when you're having a conversation with somebody, is this real or is this really forced? The self-consciousness, though, and the business of everybody being on camera now is a problem. I mean, I'm sure everybody finds it a problem, and stopping this kind of innate, that there's a performance, there's a way people talk now when you point cameras at them, don't you think? It just becomes, that's how everyone behaves on reality telly, there's just a way you behave. But that, for me, was a problem as far back as the Ark. I did a series in London Zoo, and London zookeepers had done a lot of television. So they all started speaking to interviewers off to the left, and I'd say, I don't understand who you're talking to. Because actually and in fact, I want them to talk to the lens, to the point that often, certainly in The Angels, Sarah had to turn her back in the lift, because otherwise people would talk to her, because they want eyes to look at, whereas I want them to look at me, or into the lens, therefore to the audience. And I think it's an enormous problem. The last film I made, The Lie of the Land, I went to the Lizard in Cornwall. I mean, I went that far because somehow they were out of the TV map, they were off radar. Ian, the first bloke, he doesn't have a television, I don't think, that works. And as the film gets closer to London, the third character is actually almost a TV presenter. He's so au fait with the camera, and he's done quite a lot of television as an activist. And it's a muddying of the waters.
Our last clip is going to be from The Lie of the Land.
I wonder which clip it is. Oh yeah, this is Ian. What was wrong with that one?
Nothing. There's no value for him because he's a Guernsey cross. Like, there's no trade in them at the moment. It's one of the sad things for the countryside.
I really want to contextualise, otherwise you think I'll just make weird snuff movies about cars. This was the last film I did, which is as a result of having done a film in the House of Lords when the hunting bill came to and fro and to and fro, and I think they spent 700 hours discussing hunting in the British Parliament and 6 discussing the Iraq War, because we're animal lovers. So I wanted to do a film about hunting. I don't hunt, I don't ride, but I did sort of think it was a really stupid idea to spend this much time thrashing, so I thought I'd waste more time on it by looking at it on television. But I went out with a hunt on a flesh run, because hunts basically have always fed the hounds through going to farms and picking up fallen stock. But there was nothing fallen about these. They were just shooting healthy animals. And it was a proper journalistic discovery. I mean, I was really, really horrified and distressed by it. And it completely changed the course of the film. Normally, I would have made a portrait about that first man and his brother, because they were incredible characters. They were completely off the main track, and they were fascinating as characters living in Britain in the year 2000 or whatever it was. But it in fact became a much more didactic political film, full of me ranting and raving in the voiceover and trying to make people upset about it. So I showed also these extreme moments, which I think in every other film I've made, I've actually cut out the extreme moment, because if you do something shocking in a film, people no longer can really absorb the human condition or the grey matter that affects us all, which is, are we happy, who are we, where are we going? You know, sort of human issues which I'm interested in. And so it became a very much more politicised film, and it was a nightmare to cut because I split it across these characters. But that's why we're watching all the slaughtering. So the first man did the slaughtering. I went to this second hunt because the first man couldn't articulate what he was doing, and it wouldn't have been fair, and I couldn't have explained to the audience. So this character does exactly the same. He's in the neighbouring hunt, but he has the ability to talk about it in a way that I think is very affecting. Sorry to interrupt.
But I said they are a little crossbred calf.
Poor little things.
So explain to me, Paul, what are they?
These are calves that are crossbred Frisians, crossed with Jerseys and Ayrshire in it. Totally valueless.
Why are they valueless?
Well, the modern system. They're not. They're never going to make a decent beef animal. So if the end product isn't going to be top notch, it just would not be worth rearing. New system.
You have to crossbreed to survive in the dairy business. A Jersey gives you more butter fat, which is good for ice cream and cheese. And an Ayrshire improves the udders, making it easier to attach a cow to a milking machine.
I don't like it. It's what they've been driven to.
What, dairy farmers?
Well, they've all got to find their niche, how they can continue farming. Either they've got to go either a lot bigger like a factory farming state with 1,000 cows, which is going to happen on a lot of farms, and the small farmer can only go one way.
Is that animal dead or is that reflex?
It's dead.
These calves might once have become bully beef, but we don't eat that anymore. Or they might have become veal, but we found that cruel, so it's largely raised overseas. And they'd never produce a decent steak, so they go.
Morally, as a country person, we weren't brought up to do this. We were not, you know, I mean, you all like animals, and you were not brought up to shoot healthy animals. It's pure economics that is, you know, driven them to this now.
Can't get out there, girls. The gate's over there.
That's quite impressive, Glenn. Are you surprised?
What?
That they're coming like that?
Why shouldn't they? They're my little dears.
But you're normally chasing them and beating them
Yeah,
with
but
sticks.
they'll still come. They know I'm not chasing them today. They shouldn't be able to get through there. Yeah, they have to go back up now to that gate. If they really love me, they'll go back up and out of there. Come on, old gal! Come on, man! They're coming. Oh, what a lovely sight. Come on! Oh, he missed me! Come on! Oh! Come on! Oh, Dad! Come on! Oh! Oh! Oh, Dad! Come on, Dad! Oh! Well, gal.
There's music because it's the end of the film. I was thinking, how embarrassing. Can I just say something about that last bloke and that last shot? He was a Chipping Norton farmer, and I'd been to Cornwall with him and his wife and his friends, poor them putting up with me, but I'd been on a 4-day trip and not really filmed anything. And it was all a mess, one of those classic things in documentary. You think, oh my God, what a waste, what a waste, what a waste. And then we got back, and he just said, oh, I'll just stop, just before he got home. And I leapt out of the car, and he went over. That was just one of those chance moments, and I always find it deeply satisfying, because that was after 4 days of nothing. And suddenly there was just this, and it was completely spontaneous, because actually he diverted from going home to just check on the cows before. I'm just saying that because it's quite satisfying, isn't it? Because we all waste so much time trying to film things that don't work.
I think it's about time that we should open up to the floor. Does anybody have any questions they'd like to ask Molly?
Molly, first of all, thanks for
Hi. First of all, thanks for coming. I guess I'm just going to mention how I found your films. I think the Angel was on TV, and it started, like you say, we talk about the idea of kind of films and just being allowed to start, and that's what happened. I just switched on television, it was on, I started recording it, and that wound up on a VCR tape alongside things like Midnight Run and Spies Like Us and da-da-da. And I guess what I'm saying is that watching that kind of changed my value system, because I, as a result, see speeches like the one we had from your man in the tube station there as being as epic and important as those big Robert De Niro speeches, as it were. Now, I don't know if that's deliberate or not, but do you see a kind of epicness in those tiny little moments?
Yeah. I see epicness in how people really are. And that's why I don't do fiction, because I'm so deeply thrilled by just how people are. But the hideous job is trying to get to that point of how you get into a position, as I said, when that can happen. Because there's a potential in all of us to deliver or to talk passionately, or even not passionately, just interestingly, about your world or your life or what you do. And it's just very difficult and rare when you get those moments where, I mean, I think even in years of filmmaking, I'd say it's quite rare, those moments that are completely magical when you know it's happening. And it's wonderful, and I do think they're epic moments, and I think it's what people are capable of, which is why it's a bit of a shame that they're not given a chance. That's why I don't like... I mean, reality TV is wonderful and it's entertaining, but it is entertainment. It's not people's real lives, which is what I think is so exciting about documentary.
Hi there. I think it's really satisfying to see a successful female documentary director who's also a mum, and I'm just wondering how you manage to kind of balance being a mum with making films.
I don't. That's why I feel so fraudulent sitting here. I haven't made a film since Lie of the Land. That's 3.5 years. And that's how I do it, by not making films. It's terrible. Because it's also a massive investment of your time and emotion making this sort of film. And in fact, I've been sitting here in Sheffield watching films and thinking, why do I have to make such heavy weather of it? I think of making a film as going to move in with somebody and making someone else my family for a bit, and I can't do that because I have quite little children. Not little, but the youngest is 8. And I'm very, very grateful to have them. But it's a definite conflict of interests. I can't... Lie of the Land was a nightmare to cut because I was yo-yoing between Cornwall. I mean, I was doing the most irresponsible things. I would scream down the motorway to some timeless people on the Lizard and basically say, "Are you happy?" and then leap back into the car. And the rushes, it never built into a coherent film. It was a very tortuous edit because it wasn't organic, because I've been commuting because of home life. So I've got to... I think stop making heavy weather out of it, because the Lie of the Land worked beautifully. I don't need to move in and live in. But I do think you have to decide... well, I just think you can't do both. I don't think you can be around in that nice, boring, tiring way that children need you there in a boring way, just like I think when you make films, I want to be there so people know I care about what they do. I'm not going to just turn up like a news crew. I want them to know I'm prepared to be bored of them, whether they like it or not. And that's quite painful if someone else is putting your children to bed and you're sitting there thinking, he's never going to let me in here anyway, why don't I just go home? You start weighing things up in a different way. So it isn't a happy mix. In the House of Lords, I had 2 children while I made it. And that was ridiculous. And most of the peers thought it was just an 18-month pregnancy. They didn't seem to understand that it was 2. I mean, I'm laughing happily because I luckily had children. I nearly forgot. I had them very late in life. So I don't think... I mean, I'm very excited to have both, but it's still challenging me as to how to make the sort of film I want to make whilst having another life. The Ark, which was a wonderful series in London Zoo, frankly, I lived in the zoo and I lived in a cutting room. So it damn well should have been good because I gave it everything. I had absolutely no other life. Family members died, people were born, I never went to a funeral, a wedding, I never left. I was just in that film for, well, it was 4 hours of film for about 2 years. Well, I'm not saying it's heroic, I'm saying the reverse. I'm just saying I think it's just how you make these films. And I can't quite work out how to do it. What I've ended up doing is eternally filming at my children's school, as I was just discussing with Charlotte, to the point that the vicar phones me up to film funerals now, which happened last week, and that was actually made me think, no, I actually got to stop this. I was sobbing, filming a Chinese woman burying her 10-year-old son. And I thought, why am I doing this? And I'm looking for the good angles, and it's a sort of, and what? So she can take it to China and show her relatives, and I think I've gone a bit bonkers. So what I have to do is not take the camera into my domestic life and just make a very clean cut-off, and then you get quite desperate to film, because I'm so furious about everything going on in England. I would love to make some films at the moment. That's a very long-winded reply. It's like a therapy session.
Any other questions?
I've got a loud voice. How personally do you take feedback or potentially criticism if you've invested your 2 years and not gone to funerals and weddings and things like that? How do you deal with maybe feedback?
Bad feedback, really badly. Don't we all? I mean, it's awful. No, I don't feel at all tough about bad feedback. And in fact, even if you have lots of good and a bit of bad, I'll always focus on the bad, which is human nature. I mean, why did you ask that question? It's quite an interesting question, because don't we all hate bad feedback?
But I would say more so if you've invested all your life, you put that in priority, and you put that for friends' weddings,
yes,
funerals and things like that, but it may take more personally if you did leave it in that instance.
But, and here's a horrible thing, well, actually, after that, it didn't. In fact, the most deeply satisfying thing is the payback you get for such an investment is a wonderful feedback. And Lie of the Land had the most, I would say, to be hippie-ish, really beautiful editorial response. It became like a conversation because journalists wrote, not specifically about the film, they used it as a springboard and wrote with huge passion about the subject. A woman called Catherine Flett wrote a piece that was so much better than the film. Deborah Orr wrote a wonderful piece. And they were using the film. But actually, it was fantastic as a filmmaker to have somebody produce something as strong. You know how sometimes as filmmakers you can think what journalists do is just use your films to write stuff, and why don't they go and research their own stories? It wasn't like that. It was a conversation. And I think actually that's the feedback I've had from huge investments of time. But what I'm questioning is whether you need to spend that much time. You know, if you cast something and there's a situation you understand and the person is in a position that you can film, do you really need to spend the months? Maybe I should ask Colin. Go back to the rule book. I don't know. No.
As someone who's spent a lot of time in TV news, which is obviously not a good thing to admit to, I'm quite interested in the relationship. You're talking about having a two-man crew there, in that you've got a sound recordist, and that's quite useful in filming to sort of develop a second relationship, if you like, and take the pressure off. But you're also obviously talking about people talking down the lens to you. So I wonder, as someone who's always been to the left of camera and had people talking to me there, I wonder how you feel about it, whether it's even possible to make the kind of film that you make if someone else was shooting it, but you were there as a director. Is that still possible?
Yes, I think it's totally possible, but I am the eye. I mean, that's just how I see things. And I find it very frustrating having to articulate what it is I want, because I would instinctively know where I want to be when I go into a room. It's a choreography with the people in the room. And I trained as a cameraman, if you like. I mean, that's my thing. So I would love to be free not to be. If I wasn't behind the camera, I think I might ask much better questions, because I wouldn't be worrying about the sun going in or something. I would be, but there would be a compromise because of the dialogue, not it being into the lens. And also, it's just, I think I try not to have too much of a distinction between me, the camera, and the subject. I'm very honest about the fact I'm shooting. I'm very rarely with the people without the camera. I've nearly always got it close to my face, so even if I'm just hanging around with Crispin or we're drinking, I'll never film people in that way, because then they're not going to trust me. But I'll have it really, really close, so that if I need to, because the difference between chatting to someone and getting on and having this And the death that then happens as soon as you do that is quite, it's a big difference. So you need to have it close. And the idea of having to say to somebody, it would break it all. It's a very delicate moment of chemistry, I think, when you know, and they know they're being filmed, and you sort of all know it's working. They know too that you're filming. That's what I hate about video cameras, though, is that red light. It's like a studio light, isn't it, saying you're on. It's curious.
How long do you spend with your subjects before you get the camera out and start filming?
Usually the actual people I'm going to film, no time at all. Once you've found your the subject, the person, then best not to, because best to get to know each other on film. And it's often a bit clumsy at front, but nothing's clumsier than trying to film someone you know, because then you've sort of already begun a journey with them without the camera there. So they've got to get to know and like you with the camera. The situation I'll spend a hell of a long time in, so that I know what their world is, what the issues are. That's why the Underground, it was very useful. It wasn't a waste of time spending 6 months. It was quite a loss of earnings spending 6 months, but it meant that when I got in there, I totally understood the context. I knew the misery of their work situation. I didn't set out to make it, but I sort of got the picture. And same with the army. It was about management of boredom. Sitting in Northern Ireland in a barracks, 100 blokes stuffed in that police station. They were bored out of their minds. So I knew from all the other regiments I'd visited what the thing was, what I was going to be after, but I had never. I met Crispin, I think, once for half an hour before I met him with a camera.
I was just curious to hear what films you're sort of burning to make now, apart from one right now.
That would be giving it away. I mean, there's one. There's one that I would really like to do in a school in Peckham. But you see, I feel the bullshitter. I've talked about it for ages because I went to see the school. I absolutely know could make a great film there. But it's a certain irony in me making a film about problems of education and abandoning my own children. So I think that, you've got to sometimes choose subjects that would fit a bit better, but not my children's school. That's the key thing. I don't really want to answer it fully.
How does it feel? You're in a business, in a process of pretty much issuing all your films on DVD. So you
fabulous.
It's fabulous.
Yes.
Some people often talk about that process as feeling like a kind of premature obituary.
Well, no, the difference is when you make films now and they originate on tape and you have it on DVD in a flash. I haven't had my stuff available for 100 years. I mean, all the early ones that were on film. The first thing I shot on tape was Blair in 1996. And from then on, they're on tape, but I still have never been organised enough to actually get them into DVDs with pretty pictures on the box and sell them. And I cannot tell you how satisfying it is. Because to work incredibly hard, but it's television. It's not even cinema. It comes and it goes. And you're lucky to get feedback or awards. It keeps the thing alive and you feel fabulous for a bit, but basically it's gone. And therefore, to have it now as a thing, I'm really, really pleased about. And also because cumulatively, it's quite interesting. It is like a social history of Britain. It makes me realise how old I am. Because the way London looks in the 80s, the way London looks in Heart of the Angel, and the way nobody's on phones, the way people behave is different. There are fewer channels, so the films are different. So it's actually, I find it interesting looking back at them. Despite the fact I'm still dealing with life in the same way, they are fundamentally different.
Yeah, and certainly I think Lie of the Land, you spend a lot of it in a car. The anger is much more sort of palpable, and the fact that it's not so much tethered to a particular institution or even one central character, it does seem very different from, as it were, a kind of classic Molly Dineen film.
But it was this problem that I set out. I thought I'd found my subjects. I was then so horrified by what they did. I had to do I had to just shift. In fact, I was greedy. That's why the edit was hell, because I was trying to hang on to the first man because he was extraordinary. The second one because of the way this silent rage, the way he talks. But actually, for an observational film, it was impossible because I'd turn up and his whole family on mute. Nobody would speak to me. He'd hardly say hello. And you think, I cannot think of a single situation in Great Britain that would be less conducive to an observational film than this. But you had to, so we went out on the killing mission and then he would start talking.
I don't know a lot about film, okay, but I'm getting the impression that you still film on film rather than...
No, I film on tape now.
Or you don't use digital anymore, is that right?
I shot on 16mm film, and then I shot on enormous Betacam things. And then I shot Jerry on a little Sony VX1000. I mean, honestly, it looked like a little handy cam.
Perhaps I'm not expressing myself here.
Oh, sorry.
I'm a DJ, okay, and I play off vinyl, so I use analog sounds, and I wonder whether you use analog to film rather than just the digital that everybody else seems to be using. And my question around that was, if you do, are there any advantages that you can see using analog over digital film?
I don't understand. That's the horrible truth. Do you mean, do I use tapes?
I don't understand what that means.
I think...
But he doesn't. He's talking analog and digital.
That's what it means, I think, yeah. Well, I don't really. I just thought you made a lot more on celluloid than you've just admitted. I thought a lot of those... Wasn't The Lie of the Land on film then?
No.
Oh, right. I thought it was.
No.
I thought perhaps you might have a view on whether film is really making something better or easier or more visually interesting than video, and whether you've moved completely to the digital
No, the reason
HD.
I'm much happier shooting on film is because the cameras were so much more sophisticated. That the way the Arton was built, which is what I always use, was it was made by, wasn't the man who made the Arton, sorry? Couton, but his girlfriend was an anthropological filmmaker, wasn't she? She used to sort of test out the cameras. I remember this, they were wonderful. If you're hand-holding for 12 hours a day, they were wonderful because they just sat and rocked. So the magazine sat over your shoulder bone. The weight of the lens was there. The eyepiece was such that you did have a free eye and everything else was here. The problem with video is this bloody great metal block in front of your face, and also all the weight is in your right hand, which makes hand-holding so difficult. And they're often too small. The more compact they become, the harder they are to shoot. Funny enough, in the House of Lords also, the peers wanted me to have a bigger camera because it made me look more important. And I'd say, look, this is what I've got. And news crews would go past with enormous cameras. They'd say, why haven't you got one like that? So if I wasn't taking them seriously. So the film tape thing, you'd have thought tape would be marvellous for me because you can shoot and shoot and shoot, it doesn't cost a lot. It's a nightmare. And it's a nightmare for reasons also that because I like to have these ongoing relationships or conversations during which I will then shoot or stop shooting, we're not with a massive distinction between the two. On tape, you've got to have the 10-second run-up, haven't you, to be able to use it in an edit. So you've either got it running the whole time and then your editor is weeping because of the hours of shit he has to watch before getting to the moment. And then there's also a problem in the edit, because I haven't worked out how you can recreate the feeling of running through rushes on a Steenbeck. You know, because I've always reconstituted rushes. So when you're cutting out of a roll, we would always put the stuff out of the trim bin into the reels so that you then run fast through to find a shot and you're permanently reminded of what you've shot. Whereas on tape, it seems to be about fragmenting the shot, typing it, then how you're going to describe it, and then you just go straight to it. So it works completely differently with your mind, and to my mind doesn't work well with the way I shoot. I mean, it's got to be loaded in. Maybe if there's anyone here who can suggest something. I find it a real problem that you lose rushes, and I also, just to really bang on, cannot stand the fact that you have the option to do many different edits. On film, you cut one thing, and you refine it, you tweak it, you change it, but essentially it is one physical thing. On every film I've done in tape, there will be version 1, there'll be Tuesday's version 2, there'll be Molly's version. Every editor leaves me with an open timeline, and it's called Molly's Fuckabout or something, because they know I'm going to want to play with it. But then that becomes another version. So it's constantly dispersing, rather than condensing what it is and all the conversations down to one pure piece.
It seems to be it seems like almost a kind of technological analogue to the kind of processes of institutional social fragmentation that you're often documenting.
Yes. But great question. I mean, I think that's what, is that the sort of, yeah.
We've got time for a couple of questions. Is there somebody at the back? No. Yeah.
Hi. I'm just interested to know whether you look for a story, because there's a lot of talk in documentary about finding a narrative, but you seem to be just sort of, are you waiting for stories to emerge, or are you just looking for characters more?
I think both have happened. I mean, I think the biggest problem is just going to an institution thinking, oh, I'm interested in the army, or I'm interested in the House of Lords. And then you've got all the access problems, and even when you got into the institution, you then need to find some sort of thread or a dynamic, or then a character who'll say yes. I mean, I've done that. I've also followed a story in the arc, The Zoo Was Changing, and that was a story of such dynamism, such extraordinarily strong natural narrative. That's what made me. I shot 110 hours before the BBC knew, and because I shot my whole budget rather than using it for editing. But then they'd also collapsed, and there was no head of documentaries. And that was a story that was so strong you couldn't stop shooting it. And I'd got so immersed into the institution. Again, it was like that moment with Derek in the ticket office of the Angel, a moment of total perfection that fuses what you do with a situation, with people who understand what you're doing there. And it's, I'm not saying it just happens, of course, it takes enormous skill, but I mean that it's potentially there. Whereas The Nightmare, in fact, was the Angel. It was a situation, and it was just characters in a situation. There was no story. We tried to create a dynamic. Well, there were the lifts that broke all the time, which became this, the constant, the sort of the gag through the film. But basically, the tension was created between night and day, because you need some shape, I think. The Lie of the Land, I created a false narrative. It was the only time I've ever done where I made it autobiographical, because I couldn't make the film work because of these fragmented rushes. I had no natural story in the material. I just had 3 fabulous chunks that didn't go together. In fact, repeated each other all the time. And so the final solution was, I'm afraid to say, I am going on a journey. I am going to discover what's going on in the country. Come with me, which I would never normally do, but it works very well in this case. So I think a story is fantastic because it gives you the framework, and then you can hang things on it. But I don't think it's a disaster if you don't have one. You can be interested in a character or a situation or an institution, and then try and find some dynamic or something that will illuminate it. I mean, you've got to know what you're going to point at. So what you've got to find the thing going on that they care about, and that will take you to some story, however infinitesimal, but it'll give you the sort of branches to put the leaves on, if you like.
Final 2 questions.
I was just wondering about the casting side of things, because you're saying about how it's important to get to know your characters on film, and yet I was wondering how you negotiate casting in that case. How do you see that they're going to work?
I think it's a total hunch, I mean, and then also it's very personal. You know yourself, like meeting somebody. You know sort of immediately if there's anything between you, if there's any chemistry, if you're interested, or if that person's strong enough. I mean, I think it's wrong to generalise, because the brilliant man in the underground was definitely not clever casting. In fact, he wouldn't let me in his ticket shop for ages because I didn't have the right permission slips. He was a right bastard, in fact. And then we spent time together, and then this just completely natural friendship grew. I mean, there I was in a porter cabin with him and Sarah, and he was bored out of his mind. And so something rather wonderful grew out of that. But By casting, I think you're just picking somebody who you think is strong enough to hold it.
And isn't being too performative on camera.
Yes, for me that's a massive, massive turn-off in filming. I mean, I really don't want to film people who are gagging to be filmed, which was my Jerry problem, actually. And the Tony Blair problem was hilarious, where I did this broadcast, because he kept projecting what he thought a politician looked like. I mean, I've got 37 hours of him trying to be a politician and saying, look, and me saying, and could we possibly do that differently? And then it went on and on and on, and they kept turning up with makeup people to make him up. And I had to put him in the most bizarre situations to try and get him actually to just be him and be confident enough about being him. Do you know, I always wanted to make a film about him when it got in, and there was a lot of rubbish was talked about. They sort of pretended they were going to let me and then didn't. And I think the footage is, I've always thought it was like wallpaper, because it's me trying to film Tony Blair trying to look like a politician. Looking at it recently for this DVD, for the BFI, I think the outtakes are fabulous. There's John Prescott so furious that he's having to do a photo shoot with Tony Blair, because he says, I'm supposed to be fat and ugly, aren't I, and New Labour. And I said, what's Tony Blair supposed to be? And he said, you tell me. And it's sort of, in hindsight, and now we know what's happened to Blair and New Labour and the end of the arc, it has taken on a whole other meaning. I'm very interested in looking at that stuff now.
I think we had one last question here.
Thanks. Looking at the two clips of the calves being shot,
yeah.
Which are very powerful and very painful as well, and you looked like you were in a lot of pain looking at them just now.
Yeah, I found it so distressing, and that wasn't the worst of them. There were, but I honestly couldn't get. There was one scene. Anyway, you should carry on with your question.
Well, this is what I wanted to ask you. I mean, you know, I mean, obviously you're seeing it for the first time when you're shooting it, but you're still having to make a documentary, and you're still having to have a dialogue with the farmer who's shooting this. So what was going through your mind at that point?
Well, how lucky you are to be making a film about it, so you see something shocking and you can tell people about it, or not, I was going to say do something about it, whatever difference the documentaries make. But I suppose because it's shocking, you think I have to tell people about this. Is that what you mean, or you mean do you want to do?
Well, yeah. I mean, I'm just interested in the. Are you divorced from what's happening? Are you reacting to it on an emotional level, on one level, whilst thinking?
I was very upset about it. I was also thinking, God, this is good footage. This is really shocking. You know, you've also got that terrible crass thing going on because you're making a film, of thinking, my God, this is extraordinary. But no, I had no problem with any of that. I had a big problem with the fact that they were doing it, but then I knew what the film was going to be about. The most terrible moral issue for me was filming the two ladies in Africa. We haven't seen the clip of that, but because I thought they were behaving in a really cruel way to their servants, and that really panicked me, because I thought, actually, I should be saying this in the film, that she's just taken away their water supply so she can have a 10-foot deep bubble bath, and now they've got no water for their children. Why aren't I making the film about that? Because I'm living as her guest in her house. That was the most complicated situation, because I didn't like her, and I didn't like what she stood for, and I didn't like what she did. And so I found it very hard to justify to myself that I was going to make a film that was about the kind of her condition and the fact that this extraordinary household was still going on. And in fact, I tried to make her a sympathetic character by making it clear she'd miscarried 4 children, and that's why she was kissing her ridgebacks all the time when they weren't biting the Africans who lived around her. I mean, she was a horror. And that did bother me a lot, and that's where Sarah was astounding, because I just was going to lose it. The woman she lived with was truly horrible, and in fact was murdered by the servant's friends after we finished the film. Very tricky that though, because however dreadful somebody may be, they've let you into their life. And I think you abuse it at your peril. I mean, I just think best just to walk away and don't do a film. But to start being nice to somebody and living with them and pretending you're making this sympathetic film and then shafting them, I think is unforgivable. And I think, in fact, that sort of behaviour has really debased the currency of documentary in the way we're seen by people and institutions, and I'm so bored of going to places that assume you're going to stitch them up. When I was living with the Welsh Guards in Northern Ireland, the head of the army changed and became General Guthrie, who was a Welsh Guardsman. So I was living with his regiment in Northern Ireland, and he came to do a visit. And he really disliked the commanding officer of the Welsh Guards who'd let me in. And he basically withdrew. He also didn't like the way I was getting on with people, and he started withdrawing my access bit by bit by bit, which put me into a really tricky position of sort of going against the odds to try and make a film about them, actually soldiering. Anyway.
You can see some of those films already on the first volume of the BFI re-releases, and I think the other 2 volumes are going to be out in the coming months. I'd like to thank all the technicians and the staff here at the Hubs for allowing this event to happen. I'd like to thank Poppy Simpson at the BFI for being immensely enabling, for all of you for attending, and most of all to Molly Dineen for sharing her work.